if Jose hopefully does come, then hopefully if Jose does come, then he can be the fourth presenter. So I am going to share my presentation. And let's see here. I need to. Okay. Hope you can you see this okay? Can you see my PowerPoint all right? All right, thank you.
Yes.
So this is research. This draws from research I've done with Marilyn Rubin, who's at Rutgers, Newark. And the title of this presentation is on equity and public budgeting lessons for the U.S. We draw from research we've done on gender budgeting that is more international, drawing from other countries. But we then try to take those lessons that we learned from looking at gender budgeting in other countries to apply it to the U.S. and not just to gender, but to race issues on budgeting associated with race, with class, with really any dimension of equity that you want to look at. So the overview of this presentation, there's a growing realization that budgets can and probably should have an equity dimension. In the past, that's not been the case. We've seen budgeting as more of a neutral, objective way of making decisions. But it's pretty clear to us that it has equity issues all over it. So as I mentioned, over 80 countries have been using gender responsive budgeting in some way. Not all have been successes. Some have worked well, some have not. But that, of course, means we can learn from what has happened. So again, the point that we make is that budgeting is not a neutral process of resource allocation. These are instruments that can influence the allocation of resources, which then, of course, affects equity. And so I give we have a forthcoming article in the British Journal, Public Administration, that we're drawing from here in terms of, again, the findings associated with gender budgeting in other countries. So just a little budgeting 101 to remind you. The first phase of budgeting is budget preparation, typically done by the executive, where they prepare the budget for a proposal to the legislative body. Then the second phase is the legislative review. The legislature, whether it be a city council, the U.S. Congress, Parliament, reviews the budget and at some point passes a budget, typically, hopefully. And then the budget gets executed, implemented by, if you will, the bureaucracy. So that's then the phase of governance that we in public administration are all familiar with. Then the fourth and last phase is audit and evaluation. Audits can be financial audits or performance audits. I won't go into all that. And then evaluation, program policy evaluation. Did things work? Was the money spent well? So again, just a reminder, but we use these, the next set of slides looks at these phases of the budget process and how gender budgeting has been implemented into these different phases. Austria has done quite a bit, and we think that that's important here. There's a lot to be learned, we think, from what Austria has done. It is in the Constitution. Gender impact assessment is in the Austrian Constitution. It's required, and the Constitution also calls for the implementation of impact measures, that there has to be some way of measuring it. And then each ministry or department agency is required to define those output measures to support the equity goals, the gender outcome goals. The outputs have to be defined and include gender outputs. And then there's a court of audit that assesses whether or not the outcomes and outputs have been met. So it's not the sort of thing, as I understand, that you can just put it in there and maybe you do something about it, maybe you don't. There really is a strong accountability process, part of the process. We highlight a bunch of other countries, and the common thread here is that there are some kind of instructions from the executive, the president, the prime minister, whomever, to the agencies requiring them to focus on gender equity in their budget, not only in their allocations, but in their process of measurement. Again, various examples here. Sometimes it may be a specific form that they have to fill out. It may be more left to the agency to figure out how to do it. But again, having strong accountability measures in that process is important, because if the agencies don't do it, it's not going to happen, as we know from public administration. The next phase, then, legislative review. Again, we give here 4 examples. In Sweden, the lower house of the parliament ensures that gender is a key criterion in the formulation and oversight of the budget. So while they're deliberating on the budget, that it's broken out and highlighted, and then in the oversight process that the legislature does after the budget is implemented. And again, some other examples here. Canada is interesting. The Parliament has a standing committee on the status of women that is involved in the implementation of the Budget Act. Again, when you think of analogies to the U.S., we don't have anything like that in Congress, in the U.S. Congress here. And as you might guess, the Mexico example is instructive. A lot of this comes from women in Mexico, women in Parliament. We also saw that in Rwanda after the genocide there, where there weren't many men in parliament because they were dead. And so the women, were kind of running parliament, and they said, well, this is a natural thing to do. And so they went ahead and did it. Okay, the budget at some point then is passed. It's given to the agencies to execute, to implement the budget. And going back to the Austrian example is, again, helpful. Each line ministry must consider how its activities relate to gender equality, and then to design objectives and indicators to promote it, gender equality in the budget. So that, again, is a strong mechanism to really make sure that these goals that are laid out at the very beginning of the process are actually implemented in the implementation of the budget. Other examples, Spain, gender equity objectives are established by the central agency with the input of each ministry. Israel, procurement, right? Procurement, of course, is part of budget implementation, and they have provisions for the bid will be given to a business controlled by a woman if it's tied at the end of the initial evaluation. Then Italy and Belgium, they use instance analysis, which again is very common. We do it all the time when we look at how budgets impact different regions of the country or different legislative districts. Of course, is what legislators care about. And but you disaggregate it in this case by gender, or you could do it by race, ethnicity, to decompose spending and revenue policies to see what their impact is. And then in the 4th and last phase, audit and evaluation, again, going back to the Austrian example, we mentioned the Court of Audit. So that's you now know about that. Nepal, Kenya, Senegal use gender audits to assess the actual expenditures in specific areas. And when you think about it, gender audits have to be consistent with the other phases. First of all, the other phases have to articulate what the goals are, and then the audit has to kind of come around and assess it. If agencies are asked to apply an equity focus during the budget preparation phase, but it's not reinforced by the audit, then we know what's going to happen. The average bureaucrat will put in a half-hearted effort. They'll do what they're told, but will they really implement it or not? If there's no kind of teeth to it, then they're unlikely to do so. So in our research, again, broadly looking at gender budgeting in 80 countries, we found 5 factors that contribute to the success or failure of gender budgeting. First of all, there needs to be a political commitment by government decision makers. The people at the top need to really be committed to this. Second, there needs to be a legal foundation that incorporates those equity goals, whether it be the Constitution or the key laws of the budget process. Third, there needs to be support from the lead budget agency. Again, if you're really going to formulate equity objectives in the budget process and then implement them in the implementation phase, the budget agency needs to be involved in that. It's hard to imagine it working without that. Fourth, there needs to be data available for it. It needs to be disaggregated by gender, and you would think, that's an obvious one, but a lot of countries struggled with that a lot. So, and as you think about in the U.S., how many of your state agencies have the kind of data you would like disaggregated by gender or race? And if you don't have that data, there's not much you can do. And then finally, this is not a requirement, but oftentimes we found that organizations outside of the government, their support for gender budgeting made an important difference in, first of all, causing it to pass, and then in some cases for it to be implemented over time. And of course, that could be relevant to looking at organizations associated with racial equity in this country. So these lessons we think are really important, and that's really maybe the key part of this paper, this presentation, is that if these findings from gender budgeting around the world are relevant and important, then they should apply to the U.S. and to a different dimension of equity, race-based equity budgeting in the U.S. And so that's kind of the next step we're taking here. And so what we do in each of these next slides is to look at what has been happening in the U.S., both at the federal and the local level, a little bit at the state level, but most of the action has been at the federal and the local level. So again, you need to have a political commitment from the decision makers to have equity, that it needs to be a part of the budget. President Biden, his first day in office, issued Executive Order 13985, calling for the advancement of racial equity and the support of underserved communities through the federal government. This is really important. It's the first time equity was ever broadly required throughout the federal budget, the first time in the history of the United States. Say what you will, one way or the other about Biden, you love him or hate him, but he did do this, and I think that's that's a very significant act. A local example, City of Austin, Texas, realized they had there was a study that came out that found Austin to be one of the most segregated cities in the nation. And so they reacted and they said, boy, we got to do something about this. So they developed an equity office that developed equity assessment tools for the budget analysis. So the tools for analysis of the budget from an equity perspective. Philadelphia is also doing a fair amount here. Both the mayor and the city council, at least currently, are focused on racial inequities in the budget. Philadelphia has actually done quite a bit. It's an interesting case. Second part is incorporation to the legal foundations of the government. It hasn't been incorporated, of course, into the U.S. Constitution. We don't know of any other city that has incorporated into the city charter or state that has incorporated into their state constitution. But that's a possibility, right? That's maybe a goal that some might have. But when you stop and think about it, we have in this country very strong federal laws, for example, on special education, making sure that any kid can have access to education, no matter their physical or mental ability or disability. And then the Americans with Disabilities Act, I think, is another analogy. Before that, agencies were not required, governments were not required to provide access to disabled folks. And so they either did or didn't, whether they felt like it or not. When the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, that created a change. It was a requirement. It gave a constitutional right to all of us, abled or disabled, to have access to facilities. Many states in their constitutions have provisions in their K through 12 education that are, I would say, broadly relevant to equity. Again, 50 states, different provisions, but many of them require that all children, whether residents, whether citizens or not, but if they're living in the state, that they have access to, usually the language is something like a basic and fair education. So again, that's, when you think of it, that is an equity provision. Austin, going back to Austin again, they have a resolution mandating that the budget office evaluates the impact of city policies on equity, evaluates the best practice of other cities, and then develops recommendations to address race and socioeconomic based inequities. And so they developed this tool, this assessment tool, which I would recommend to you if you have any interest in this, as a way to actually implement the policies. And the third finding that we have, the importance of the lead budget agency. Again, as I mentioned, it's very difficult to implement an equity-based approach without the involvement of the budget agency. Think of the OMB or your state budget office. If they're not involved, then it's hard to imagine. Then some agencies might do it, but many wouldn't. At the federal level, OMB calls for the consideration of an equity discussion in its budget instructions. And remember, we talked about, we found that earlier with gender budgeting, that the calls for budget proposals, if they require, in that case, gender equity in the proposed allocations, proposed appropriations that the agencies ask for, that can have an effect. So the OMB is doing that now, and actually Marilyn and I and Sambo Muzeta, who's also here at this conference, are working on that as the next paper that we're working on. It calls for OMB's calls for agencies to consult and involve underserved communities, to consider how their organizational and decision-making processes may not account for certain perspectives, and to incorporate those practices, leading practices, into equity assessment. A couple good local examples: Madison, Wisconsin, the finance department has developed a tool. They call it the Racial Equity and Social Justice Tool. And if you go to their website, Madison, Wisconsin's finance department, you'll see it, and it's really quite good. It allows the city council then to consider how communities of color and low-income populations will be affected by proposed actions. So, giving the information that you need to the city council who's making the decisions. San Antonio, Texas, also uses a budget equity tool to look at the impact on, again, similar on communities of color and low-income communities. The fourth finding that we have, again, from our international work, looks at the importance of the availability of gender disaggregated data, or in this case, race disaggregated data. We believe it's really not possible to do a serious analysis without the data. And so at the federal level, there's what they call an Equitable Data Working Group that's been established to try to implement the executive order, right? The executive order, of course, is just a very broad statement. And then the data group, the data working group, then actually tries to implement it. And you see its priorities there, to be able to have disaggregated statistical estimates by race, gender, and other dimensions of equity. Wayne County, Michigan, the CFO said that data is critical to embedding equity into a government's operations, and budgeting for this reality is paramount. So, glad to have a practitioner say pretty much exactly what we have found to be important. And then the fifth finding and last that we have is that that the while it's not necessary for it to make it work, that there be support from organizations outside the government. This has been a pretty common thread in the other countries. Now, it's perhaps more common to have gender-based groups, interest groups in lobbying the government. But there are a couple important broad national bodies. The Government Alliance on Race and Equity has developed racial equity analysis tools that attempt to implement equity into budget decisions. And their website is quite good. It's definitely worth a look. Bloomberg has created a program, City Budgeting for Equity and Recovery. And it's they developed cases. They've looked at now 28 different cities that look at what has happened to advise cities who want to do more of this, how to develop and implement equity-based reforms in their budget. And then GFOA, who I'm sure if you know anything about budgeting, you know about GFOA, and the National Civic League are also working with cities to apply equity to budget. So, having professional organizations actually doing this, we think is fundamentally important and can help the implementation of these kinds of initiatives. So our conclusions are that the gender budgeting movement has taught us that, first of all, the governments can be used to advance equity, in that case, gender-based equity, and that equity can be incorporated into all phases of the budget process. So if anybody says it can't be done, there's evidence against that. It focused now on the U.S. and on other dimensions of equity. There has been, as I mentioned, the cases I gave you, some effort to use these budgets to advance social equity. And again, the implementation, those 5 factors that we look at, I listed there again, political support, the need to incorporate equity into the legal foundations of the government, the support of the budget agencies, the importance of disaggregated data, and support from external organizations. So we think that these lessons are very instructive as U.S. governments try to move forward to implement equity in their budgets. And we think we hope we have identified some critical tools that can be meaningful. So this final quote I really like. I think it's important. Again, it's focused on gender equity, but I think it applies more broadly. That gender budgeting is a specific example of a broader trend in budgeting whereby the budget is considered as something more than a neutral process of resource allocation, but a value-laden process that embodies and potentially influences long-standing social choices about how resources are deployed. Again, that's a finding from their research, and we think it applies more broadly. So with that, I'm thanking you for your time and attention. And then we will move on now to Richard Nakamura at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So, Richard? And if you have any troubles, Richard, I do have your presentation. I can share it. But, oh, you got it. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. or Dean Bartle, for such an interesting presentation. Okay, so how's this coming on this way? All right. So I use a double screen, so I don't know why it's coming on this way, but I hope this is. Share. And we'll just do it. Okay, I apologize for that. Okay, good morning, and thank you for joining us today or this morning. My name is Richard Nkrumah. I'm a 4th year doctoral student at the University of Nebraska. So Professor Bartle is my dean. So his scholarly advice is always very interesting. So today I'm going to kind of talk to you about a topic that I became interested in during COVID, and with a few things that I read as well. And one of those articles that actually informed my studies was from the GFOA, Government Financial Officers Association. In 2001, they posed an interesting question. This question was posed by some known people in the field of public finance, and they asked in one seminar that, do we actually need new and innovative ways to mobilize revenue? And so it became apparent that, and with their argument that possibly old ways or the traditional ways of revenue mobilization and even spending is a bit or old-fashioned. So we have to look at new and innovative ways of trying to look for money and also spend money. And the whole idea of crowdfunding came to mind because crowdfunding has been extensively used in nonprofits and businesses, right? When we think about crowdfunding, you can think about your GoFundMe, your Kickstarter, and things like that. So I also thought about the fiscal stress that COVID has imparted on local governments. And I felt maybe we can explore, or I can explore, the idea of crowdfunding in public sector organizations, especially local governments and local agencies. So that's actually what informed my research, and a bit about my literature review. Basically, what I intended to do was look at crowdfunding, which is looking for or trying to find, quote unquote, anonymous or semi-anonymous group of people to actually fund a service or a project. And the whole idea stems from utilizing a crowd, okay? So we have one of the most famous, I should say, the most known ways of utilizing the crowd, which is crowdsourcing. Ideally, the crowdsourcing is trying to solicit ideas, knowledge, skills from a crowd that is known or unknown. Okay, so crowdfunding comes from that broader framework of crowdsourcing, and within that framework, there's a platform that actually links both sides, the campaigner, right, and also the backer. The backer in this case are people who actually support this program. Now, there's also the argument that possibly we are bringing back the old ways of fundraising and terming it as something different. But I should say that traditional fundraising and crowdfunding have some similarities, but they also have things that differentiate them. For instance, in crowdfunding, what we try to achieve is to look for people that have interest in what we're trying to in the project that we're trying to achieve, right? So we look for either anonymous people, right, utilizing our social media, or people that are already in our circle but are not close to us as much. With traditional fundraising, the whole idea is to reach people that are actually in your contacts or in your immediate circle. So within the idea of crowdfunding, there are two typologies that are usually talked about. The investment-based crowdfunding and the donation-based crowdfunding. Within this work, we're going to concentrate on the donation-based crowdfunding because the whole idea of government, or the whole idea of trying to achieve certain level of productivity hinges on not looking for some future benefits as it is in investment-based crowdfunding. So we can also consider donation-based crowdfunding as civic crowdfunding, which most of the literature actually talks about. So to kind of sum what my research gap is, based on my research objectives, it's basically to kind of suggest an alternative but supplementary approach to public financing of local projects, and also to explore the less capital-intensive projects that crowdfunding can be utilized for in the public sector. And as if crowdfunding, civic crowdfunding in the public sector is new to you, then this work also tries to empirically contribute to that study of public sector crowdfunding. As I stated earlier, crowdfunding has been utilized extensively in businesses and nonprofits. So the question is, why not? Okay, and so I tried to fill this research gap by answering these two research questions. First of all, how do public sector organizations utilize crowdfunding, right? And also, what could explain individual backing or contribution to a project? To kind of achieve this, I utilized two very famous or very known crowdfunding websites or platforms. We all know about GoFundMe, right? And SpaceHive is also a much more civic focused crowdfunding page. But their civic crowdfunding is more geared towards projects, local government projects, okay, like cities, towns, villages, and even counties, but they are only based in the UK. So I kind of looked at these two and tried to figure out what governmental projects actually were done on their platforms between the COVID years. That is between March 1st, when COVID started to have an impact either economically and socially, to March 31st, when we saw the unemployment go down and things picking back up. As the British or the Ministry of Health in the UK actually gave as their timeline. So to do this, I did a content analysis of GoFundMe and SpaceHive. So I'll go through what I did quickly. With SpaceHive, I actually concentrated on all for over 4,000 projects on their website, on their platform. And out of that, I realized that only 56 out of the 1,900 successful projects were actually public sector organization led, and producing around almost $1.5 million. On GoFundMe, I used keywords because GoFundMe has millions of projects on there. So going through each of them will take a considerable amount of time. And of course, as time goes on, they post new projects. So I used keywords, and maybe that's also a limitation of why I did not get too many projects that are public sector organization led. So I used keywords such as COVID-19, COVID, coronavirus, pandemic, governments, and I had almost 15,000 hits. Out of that 15,000, only 47 projects were completed or were funded, amounting to 238,000. Now, I may have to define what public sector organizations are. I kind of thought about them as local governments, as well as schools anything that has a public sector feel to it. So that's how I defined that. So I looked at the project descriptions, the comment sections, the updates or timelines, and I kind of drew out the keywords and patterns to kind of provide some thematic analysis to it. So with some of the key findings I want to provide here is kind of interesting as well. So I realized that most of the those affiliated with the project organizers are mostly affiliated to the local government or the village or the town that they actually live in. They have some leadership role in that local government, and they mostly use words like we're working with this local government or in collaboration with this local government and on behalf of this local government for this purpose. So that term or those terms actually kind of may be influential on backers to actually contribute to the project, because naming a local government and showing some collaborative relationship kind of could influence or could show that they are credible, and could also influence the civic side of people to contribute. So individual backed projects were based on perceived benefits. Individuals backed projects based on their perceived benefits for their social circle or because of some feel-good factor. So the whole idea is people contribute to things that they feel that will be beneficial to them and to their social circle as well. For instance, there was a fund to raise almost £100,000 to build a park in a small town in the UK, and I mean they were overfunded by almost £50,000, which was a pretty huge amount. People actually cited that within the comment section that, well, I'm contributing this because first of all, it's dedicated to those who died during COVID. So it makes me feel good, or it's going to make me feel good. And also it improves my locality, my property prices will go up. And I think it's also beautiful that we have a park that's dedicated to those we lost during COVID. So the whole idea of the benefits to their social circle and also the feel-good factor actually played a role. And also public sector organization involved projects were prominent in smaller municipalities. This was actually a surprise to me, because I thought the bigger the city, the more people there are to contribute to projects. But that wasn't the case with the data that I had. And also projects were mostly between $10,000 to $25,000. And others split these projects into many small ones so that it'll give an illusion that there are different projects and they're trying to achieve the same goal. Okay, so the whole idea was to, I should say, divide and conquer. Okay, and lastly, community type endeavors such as beautification projects, building of or maintaining things, parks, and many other community amenities were massively backed, as well as educational projects. So that actually brings me to my conclusion, right? Where does that leave us? Okay. If we are thinking about where crowdfunding might work best, then we may have to think about these community-based and educational projects, because obviously during my analysis, many more contributions were made towards these projects. For practitioners too, they should also consider the fact that they could divide and conquer their projects into smaller ones so that they can give the illusion of the small projects, but contributing towards the same goal. And also for practice sake, we should also consider the fact that small communities may be the viable way to start crowdfunding for public sector projects as well. And thinking about crowdfunding is also in a way strategic. Okay, it's a strategic budgeting tool because then you can figure out where to, in case of fiscal stress or in case of low revenue, you can figure out a way to actually think about how to put where money is needed or where funds are needed. So you strategically fund certain services whilst trying to implement or use crowdfunding in a certain way. And there's a participatory budgeting idea to it. The whole idea of participatory budgeting is to solicit citizens' input in the budgeting process. Now, crowdfunding gives us a way, or gives local officials a way to actually understand the needs of its citizens and also try to incorporate those needs. And this is a question I posed during my research: would public officials rather cut services or give citizens or residents the need to contribute to projects and services? Also, COVID-19 reinforced communal giving. Many more people, contributed to some community projects during COVID. So it's essential to actually think about the effects of COVID and how crowdfunding could be a possible way to implement communally giving. And lastly, social media is very important. And when you're utilizing crowdfunding, the whole idea of crowdfunding is to use the internet to bring anonymous and semi-anonymous people together. So if we use our social media to actually describe our projects and the benefits to our society and how the projects may be implemented, then maybe crowdfunding could thrive in the public sector. So what are my limitations and further research? Data was one of my limitations. As you can see, it's out of almost 20,000 hits, I got about 97 projects out of that. And also maybe the keywords I used were a limitation as well. And also when I started this research, I realized that most of the public sector organization or civic crowdfunding websites that actually are tailored for local government and public sector organizations were defunct prior to COVID. So maybe that could have played a part in the limited data that I also got. So for further research, I have started work with IOB.org and their work in disinvested communities. IOB.org is also a crowdfunding website that actually concentrates in invested communities. And hopefully next year at COMPA, I'll present this work. And does crowdfunding actually create local development inequity or inequalities? There has been so many arguments with regards to how crowdfunding could create inequities and inequalities. And lastly, how do local officials actually view crowdfunding? And this is an interesting stream of research that could be done. So with that, I leave you and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Richard. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to go to Arturo next, and then Jose will be after that. So Arturo.
All right, thank you. My camera will play. There we go. Let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Well, I was going to put it on the slideshow, but it's not popping up. Okay, we'll just go ahead. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Arturo Menefee with the University of Alabama. It is a pleasure to be here today with you all. I've certainly enjoyed the presentations by John and Richard, and certainly have some questions for you both at the end when the Q&A session begins. But let's talk about the Equitable Neighborhoods Initiative. First and foremost, this initiative was funded by the CDC out of Atlanta and the Alabama Department of Public Health. And it's pretty much focused on addressing COVID. We all know that we were all impacted by COVID, but COVID really hit these underserved and ethnic minority groups extremely hard throughout our country, but especially in the state of Alabama. So the Equitable Neighborhoods Initiative is primarily, yes, this works best for me. Okay, perfect. So here we are. So yes, the Equitable Neighborhoods Initiative, it equips communities to address COVID-19 pandemic-related issues of today, while also building capacity to deal with health and quality of life challenges of tomorrow. So essentially what that is saying is that, yeah, we want to deal with COVID and see how we can better address COVID in these hard-hit, underserved communities, but also we want to do something focused on looking at social determinants of health. Because we know that, yes, these issues are impacting these communities, but we also know there were some issues there that were impacting these communities long before COVID ever came about. And so let's look at these issues, these items, and let's see how we can best address them so that, God forbid that another pandemic or something comes along again, we'll be in a better position to hopefully deal with those particular situations. So this is our approach, equity. And John, I love your conversation on our gender-based equity budgeting. So I definitely have a question for you there, but equity, that was our primary focus in all of these communities. And so what we wanted to do, we wanted to say, hey, where is each community at? So it's all about a certain standard or level that we wanted to bring each community up to. And in recognizing that, we realized that some communities may need more assistance than others, but again, we wanted to make sure that they had some standard level that we were trying to get all communities to. And so I guess you would say we're trying to level the playing field in a sense. Empowerment, that was definitely our approach because again, we want to come in, we want to assist, but as you know, just like with any other grant program, it's not going to last forever, right? And so while we're there, we want to teach the individuals that are in that particular community how to better focus on things that will be beneficial to not only them as a person, but to the families and to the overall community as well. And so we wanted to empower them to have confidence in themselves that, hey, you can do this, and we want to show you how to do it. And we learned a lot from them as well. Also, asset focus. When we go into communities, sometimes they don't tend to think that they have assets and resources, but they do. Every community that I've gone into, small or large, urban or rural, they all have assets. And so we really took them through an asset mapping process, identifying key partnerships, resources, tools that they could use that will help them within this particular initiative. And compassionate. We wanted to be compassionate about the communities we were serving. We're serving very diverse communities, and we really wanted to build relationships. I can't stress how important that is, but building relationships with these communities was of the utmost importance if we were actually going to be able to work with them on a long-term basis and to see some significant change. Community-driven. I can't say that enough. Community-driven. One thing that I think sometimes universities and these associations and expert groups will do, they'll come in thinking that, hey, we have all the answers. Here's the manuscript. Just follow step 1, step 2, and you'll be okay. That's not the case, okay? I can tell you that. So what we wanted to do, we're saying, hey, we want to help you, local community, establish a structure and a process And then whatever you want to plug into that structure and process, we want to help you to do that. Yes, we're going to advise, we're going to assist, we're going to guide, but this is ultimately community driven. So what do you want to do? And we're going to help you do that. And we were really focused on that. And I think as a result, you know, our communities have really bought in to this initiative, and they really benefited from this initiative as well. And then last but certainly not least, we wanted to be culturally cognizant. You know, we're dealing with different cultures throughout our state. We're dealing with Native American groups, African American groups, Hispanic groups, Asian groups, rural communities, and so very diverse group that we're dealing with. And so we wanted to make sure that we were sensitive to their cultural needs. We want to not run away from your culture, but we want to bring out things maybe that others did not know or were aware about your culture. So bring that out, let us see that, and let us recognize that. We're not going to run away from that. That's going to be a key component in all of this that we're doing regarding this initiative. So really 5 stages here. So the first stage is what we refer to as our foundation. So we had to assemble a team. And we wanted a very diverse team in terms of the individuals we were bringing in, but also the skill set, of course, but also people that had a background in either health or community development or cultural competence. So those were some of the key components that we were looking for from all of our team members. Then we had to establish the criteria for the community. So like why are we selecting your community? And so we looked at the typical stuff, you know, demographics, income, education, but we also looked at how they were impacted by COVID. And we also looked at the social vulnerability index, which kind of gets to some of those social determinants of health that I was speaking of earlier. Then we identified and selected communities. We're in 15 communities throughout the state. And then we also wanted to create our brand and training materials because, again, there's so many initiatives going on, especially with COVID. There were so many programs and things like that going on. So branding and being able to identify our program was very important. And then we went and we selected the community liaisons. This was one of the strongest components of our program because, again, we didn't want to go in saying, hey, we're going to be here, we're going to be working in this community. No, we wanted to hire someone from that local community that had knowledge of that community, that lived in that community, that was going to be facilitating this program there locally. And so that was key. That was part of our relationship building and really understanding the needs of the issues in that particular community. And then we hosted kickoff events. I can tell you this, I've gone to so many communities and, you know, we brought in great people and they've done great jobs in terms of explaining things and laying out tools and resources and identifying assets and developing plans. I mean, they do a terrific job. But one thing I noticed is that when we leave, sometimes people are not motivated or engaged to do the things that they've agreed to do. And so motivation was a big key component of this. And so we brought in motivational speakers. We made it a real festive event, and we got people engaged and excited about what we were about to do. And not just at that kickoff meeting, but throughout the program, we have pieces where there's a motivational speeches and activities that are a part of that. And I think that has certainly helped the overall feel of our program, as well as just getting people excited and keeping them excited about the program itself. So with stage 2, we want to establish infrastructure. And when we say infrastructure, we're not talking about roads or bridges. We're talking about human infrastructure, which was very important. And the public health department wanted us to do that because, again, if something happened again, or even if it didn't happen again, if they want to take a closer look at a particular county or community, we would already have these groups in place that they could connect with and get information from. So when we went in, we wanted to establish these adult advisory groups. That was very important. We wanted to form these youth community councils. Whenever we go into a community, we don't do anything without asking about the youth because it sounds cliche, but the youth are our future. And so we got to get them involved early. and they have to be a part of the decision-making process. We also had to conduct certain required trainings. Again, because of COVID, we wanted everyone to know about contact tracing and several other programs related to that, but also mental health first aid. We are hosting mental health first aid workshops all across the state in our communities because we know COVID definitely impacted our physical health, but it's certainly impacted our mental health as well. And we wanted to make sure that we address that as well. We initiated a resource directory. Again, these were from the asset mapping activities that we did early on in the process, because again, we wanted people to know that, hey, these are resources that you have right here in your community that you can utilize. And then, of course, with the website and social media accounts, of course, Facebook. As my young daughter would say, Facebook, that's for the old folks, daddy, okay? And so we want to do something for the youth as well. And so Facebook is for the old folks, and Instagram is for the younger generation. And so we really wanted to connect with those groups. So think about those things as you're planning and dealing with equity issues. And then lastly, we started to discuss a healing zone location. So very quickly, let me tell you what a healing zone is. It's primarily a small natural space or a small pocket park in a community. And we wanted to identify some things that will help the local community in terms of improving the overall health, and especially focusing on your mental health. When you're outside, moving around, again, those things are very helpful to you as far as your mental health, as well as your physical health. And so part of this particular initiative is to establish these healing zones in all of these communities. And we can also make them culturally sensitive as well. So if you have a particular herb or a particular plant that you would like to have there because of your culture, that's great. We're trying to do things like that. We encourage that. We have garden beds, raised garden beds for people that may have disabilities. Walking trails are a part of these healing zones, exercise stations, benches, picnic tables. We even have a little freestanding library where people can come and take a book and read and enjoy. It's all about relaxation. And so these were some of the things that we were trying to do to get these communities to get out more and to really address their physical and mental health issues, or physical and mental health needs there. And then stage 3 is about developing these health equity plans. And so we want to go into these communities, we want to develop these health equity plans, and we want to see how we can best assist them with the overall health goals. That was very important. Of course, with this stage, we were also starting to do the healing zone installations. And with this stage, we really want to focus on leadership and capacity development. So when you're working with municipal leaders, community leaders, it's very important for all of us to be on the same page. And the reason why I say that is because I worked in so many communities and I have so many resources, but they'll have 5 or 6 different groups. And this group wants to do this, and this group wants to do that, and this group wants to do this. And they never can really get on the same page. And as a result, they don't really develop as a community as they should. And so leadership development is a key component of this initiative. And we wanted to, of course, focus on health equity, advocacy. We wanted to inform people about the public policy process and how do you go about doing things. We wanted to also focus on community development. Hey, how do you write grants? I know Richard spoke about fundraising. How do you write grants? That's another way to generate funds for a particular initiative or nonprofit in your community. And then planning. And planning, the document is important, but I would say the process is even more important because you're bringing people together, you're sharing ideas, and I think that's very important in terms of planning. Health equity plans. So that's stage 4. So we will actually start implementing the health equity plans, still doing the same with healing. And so everything is primarily the same. Except for in this phase now, we're focused on our youth equity summits. And so we wanted to host regional youth equity summits throughout the state, because as I stated earlier, we don't want to do anything without the youth being involved. And so as a result, we wanted to make sure that we were including the youth, hearing their voice, and helping them to prepare them to be leaders of tomorrow. And then lastly, in all these communities, We're going back to do health equity plan checkups. They're going to continue all the things that we've already stated and that they're doing. We're also looking at establishing a volunteer health certificate program. And certainly we'll kind of conclude this initiative in about another year and 3 months with some state health equity summit, bringing everyone together, look at all the different communities, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't work, and devising a strategy to move forward and to keep this going in communities throughout our state. So just very quickly, here were some things that really worked well. Our community building approach really worked well as far as addressing health equity. Positive and motivational messaging. I can't tell you how much that's really impacted this in terms of getting people engaged and involved. Asset-based approach, helping individuals to identify those assets. That was really helpful. And then building that local ownership. Hey, this is my community. This is my responsibility, and engaging them all, making sure that they were aware of their abilities, their talents, their powers to really have a positive impact on their communities. And lastly, but certainly not least, that diverse, inclusive team from our local liaisons to all of our statewide partners. That was extremely important for the success of this initiative. And there you see some of the early successes. This project is ongoing. It actually ends in May of 24. And so we're still collecting data. We're still working on all these various communities, but I just want you to see these pictures, just see our diversity throughout. And then there were some challenges, a lot of times trying to reach often overlooked communities. You really gotta take time to build trust and relationships. And sometimes we're working with these small unincorporated communities. They're very busy. You have 5 or 6 people in town that are kind of doing everything. And so they're wearing multiple hats. And so again, we had to work with them based off of their time frame. And then lastly, just committing to equity requires facing historic and systemic injustices. And so as a result, there's some issues that needed to be dealt with and brought out in the open of these in a lot of these small underserved communities. And that was tough, but again, we wanted everyone to be at the table. We wanted everyone to be able to share their feelings openly. And then we wanted to say, hey, based off of how we feel, let's do something about it. Let's just not talk about it. Let's actually do something about it, and let's make things better for everyone. And so I just want to end with this quote. And it's all about, there are 2 promises in life: to accept the conditions as they exist, or to accept the responsibility for changing them. And our goal is to help people to accept responsibility for changing things in your community to make them better. And that kind of goes along with everything that we focus on. And like I said, we're still collecting data, still collecting information. This project is still ongoing, but we have seen some amazing results, and we're really making a difference in these communities. It's been great working with these local mayors and city council persons, county commissioners. So we brought everybody to the table: business sector, university, community colleges, and in those 15 communities that we're working with, it's really wonderful. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you all.
Arturo, thank you, sir, for such an excellent presentation. We'll move now to Jose. Has a great presentation on leadership. And Jose, if you can shoot for about 10 minutes, that'd be great. 10 to 12 minutes, that would give us time then for discussion at the end. So you're on.
Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to meet you here, John, Arturo, Richard, Alicia, Loretta, James, and George. Yeah, and let me share my PowerPoint. Okay. So okay. So are you able to see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, actually, my presentation is a follow-up what Arturo was talking about, leadership. Yeah, and also I want to add gender too. So this is my general question of my research. Do leadership styles and gender influence leader effectiveness? So the big concepts that here I want to touch has to do with leadership styles, gender, and how leadership styles and gender affect leadership effectiveness. That's what I want to see, especially because in gender, we have some gender-based disparities. For example, like around 20% of public managers here in Texas, because there's researchers here in Texas, but in national, around 20% of authorities in local governments are female, and they make around 73 of what males make. So there is some gaps in literature about how gender affects leadership effectiveness and styles of leadership too. So we want to work on that. So when we talk about gender, gender is a social construct. So there are some activities, some rationales that we attach to gender, like for example, like strength, like power, aggression, we attach to men, right? And there are other characteristics we attach to female. So when we talk about gender work is all those activities, all those perceptions that people do in order to act according to their defined gender. So when we say, when we talk about effectiveness is the capacity of leaders to meet the organizational goals. So in the literature, we found that male and female are equally effective. But however, when men work in more masculine activities, male are more effective. But when female work in less masculine activities, female are more effective. So that's why we want to see how gender works, how is the contribution of genders to effectiveness of leadership in local governments, especially here in Texas. So when we talk about leadership, we are going to talk about transformational leadership, transactional leadership, and passive avoidant leadership. So each of this type of leadership have several components that we want to see how that works. So I already talked about this. The thing is, the big point here about gender is because if gender is there's a lack of research in gender in the contribution in local governments, it's possible that this exclusion of female in local governments that is affecting organizations, public organizations, because the exclusion of good talent. That's why we want to focus in gender to see how much is the contribution that is possible that we are missing. So in the literature, we found that female are more transformational leaders, and males are more transactional leaders. And also there are some body of literature that shows that female are more effective. And also there are other body of literature that shows that male are more effective. But in reality, there is a mix found in here. But all this research have been done in private organizations that we want to test now in public organizations. So these are my hypotheses here. My hypotheses are local public managers with transformational leadership styles are more likely to produce effective outcomes than managers with transactional or passive avoidant leadership styles. And also, female public managers are more likely to produce effective outcomes than male counterparts. and female public managers are more likely to exhibit transformational leadership styles than male counterparts. And male public managers are more likely to exhibit transactional leadership styles. And also male are more likely to exhibit a passive avoidance leadership style. So this is my model here, the 3 leadership styles and gender impacting effectiveness, leader effectiveness. So the methodology. This data was collected here in Texas in the fall 2020. So we work in a partnership with My Garden organization. So we sent an email using an MLQ, a questionnaire, and also including other questions too. We sent through email to all public managers here in Texas. And then we receive the positive feedback, we send the questions, and also we had some interviews too. We had 28 interviews because this paper is going to be a quantitative paper, but also qualitative. So it will be mixed methods. So here's the descriptive statistics. You can tell me when how many minutes I have left. I will try to be quick. So here's the descriptive statistics. The majority of public managers are male, 66%. So the majority of the public managers are in the age of 45 to 55 years old. So, and the majority of public managers are white. So here's how I measure the variable, the dependent variable leadership effectiveness. So and the independent variables of the leadership styles are a Likert scale from 0 to 4, from not at all to frequently. So gender is a dummy variable. So this is a t-test to see how male and female exhibits, if they exhibit transformation, transaction, or passive avoidance. When we see here, when we compare male and female, there's no statistically difference in transformational leadership. But clearly, in transactional leadership, males shows here statistical significance. So males are shows a transactional leadership style. So this is a regression analysis where it shows that the leadership style that the most contribute to leadership effectiveness in local governments are transformational leadership. So that's why we want to see if female are transformational, to see how they are impacting leadership effectiveness. But in this case, transformational leadership impacts as a whole. So, and then going deeper, the second part, we study here each components of leadership style to see how that affect leadership effectiveness. So we go deeper here. And then we will go deeper, and we see the idealized influence of leaders and motivation. Arturo was talking about also motivation. That is impact statistically. There's a statistic significance impacting leadership effectiveness. So it's very important, idealized influence, motivation, and also contingent reward. So when we talk about contingent reward here, we want to see more how the reward structure works in local governments. We want to see how that differs by leadership styles and gender. So, and here we use the interviews question, the interview question that we had here with city managers, and we're going to see how is that the difference according to the gender, according to the leadership style. So, so far, because I'm working in this research, so far the hypothesis 1 has been confirmed, supported by the data. Local governments that are more effective are transformational leaders. And also hypothesis 2, hypothesis 4 is also supported by the data. Male public manager exhibit more transactional leadership style. So we still we have to here to see if it's supported by the data, how gender reward in local governments. So the limitation of this study is that the sample size is 211 city managers. And so the sample size too small. If we carry out this research at national level, maybe the results could be different. And also this is a self-reported data, which could be one of the limitations. That's pretty much all I have for you to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jose, and thank you for keeping on time. It's very much appreciated. We do have some time now for comments, questions. So if there's anybody who has anything they'd like to bring up right away, you can do it. And then, or if you want to put your questions in the chat, if it's more kind of for clarification, that'd be great. So Jose, if you can stop sharing your screen, that'd be helpful. I know Arturo, you had mentioned you had some comments earlier. So why don't you, if you want to go first, and then if others are kind of thinking of their questions, I really appreciate our audience for hanging with us in this time.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, John, and a great job moderating. You talked about the gender-based budgeting, and you gave some great examples. I was just wondering, what was one of the greatest challenges that would be against gender-based budgeting, would you say, based off of your research?
Well, I think like a lot of things, I mean, similar to what you found, people have to take it seriously. It's one thing to write it down, to say, yeah, we care about equity, we're going to do it. It's another thing to do it. And this is what I love about public administration. We're about getting things done. And we know from our research on implementation, how do things get done? How do you make things actually happen? And really a lot of what we, the kind of normal public administration stuff you'd find in the textbook fit pretty well about, actually getting, some kind of equity initiatives implemented and to make them happen. And then the reporting cycle on the audit phase to report then back to the beginning of the process again, the formulation process again. So it fit pretty well with a lot of public administration research. Of course, it was just focusing on a different set of questions. So really, I think kind of similar to what you found too, Arturo, in your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And I was just going to ask you, because again, I could really see, maybe us working together on some things in the future, but did you ever look at those numbers in terms of a census tract or a community block? Because I would love to see what those numbers would be for like a neighborhood, so to speak, since I'm working in Equitable, with this Equitable Neighborhood Initiative.
Right. That's so Madison, Wisconsin, the example we talked about, they do that. And then I believe Austin, Texas did as well. If you go to their web, I'll send you the links, but if you go to their websites, they have the actual forms that you fill out. And so, if you're a agency head requesting more funds, then you have to show that how you think this is going to impact the communities that you're focusing on, and then that provides an accountability mechanism on the back end. So then you can say the next year, okay, did it actually work? We gave you the money. Did it actually work? I mean, what did you do with it? And did it improve outcomes? Now, we know that a lot of these things are, as you say, very deeply rooted, and you're not going to just, even if you have all the money you need and you do it, and that, not next year, you're not always going to see the change.
Right.
But, that it's part of the process. And so maybe it's not a year, maybe it's 3 years, something like that. But, if nothing else, did you implement it? Did you do what you say you're going to do? So kind of more of a process evaluation as opposed to an outcome evaluation.
Right.
And then the outcome evaluation then maybe can take, can happen over a longer period.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well,
thanks
hey,
for the
I
question.
have more questions and comments, but I want to let someone else jump in.
Okay. Yeah. Let's let anybody else jump in. Our faithful audience who's hung with us.
Yes.
I do think that there are some nice connections with these presentations. Jose, your work on leadership is, fundamental, and that's what all this is about. I mean, and what I think all the rest of us talked about, leadership is behind all this. That if you don't have effective leadership, you can have all the great ideas in the world, but nothing's going to happen. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, you talked about the different leadership styles, and not so much on your findings, but on your kind of sense about what kind of leadership do we need to actually effectively implement equity-based goals and objectives. Jose?
Yeah, so in general, we found that transformational leadership it makes the bigger contribution to leadership effectiveness. And that in the literature shows that female exhibit more transformational leadership style. But also when we go deeper, we see that there's other components of leadership that affect leadership effectiveness. Like, for example, in transactional leadership, the big component is rewards, contingent rewards. And we see that contingent rewards make a very positive impact in leadership effectiveness. So that's why we want to see how males and females rewards, which is the difference in that. So we go in two levels. First, in the general level about leadership styles and gender. And in the second one, we go deeper to see how each components make a contribution to the leadership effectiveness. But also the thing is very important. What shows in the literature is that in local governments, especially in all public organizations, the activities that they have been created by males. So all the jobs are created by males. And when women go to public organization, they have to work, they have to do activities created by males. So and then gender roles come into play. If there is a definition culturally, which are the activities, the roles for men and for female, obviously men have an advantage because there is a masculine roles in local governments compared to female. We can say that females are in disadvantage. That's why we want to see, okay, how leadership styles work here and what is the difference. That's why we go very deep to see how things work in local governments.
I think you bring a really good point. I mean, if the institutions have been constructed by, people like me, white guys, you're not going to get a change right away. It's going to take a little while, because maybe part of what you need to do is to just change the organization, to move away from hierarchy into a flatter organization. We've got about a minute left. So I know, Arturo, you've got some things on your mind. I'll give you the last minute here.
Yeah, well, I just want to say again, great job, everyone. Richard, just one quick question for you, sir, if you don't mind. When you were doing your research, did people see crowdfunding as an investment, or just as another way, especially if it's being led by the government, did they see it as another fee or tax? Because again, from my experience, sometimes it's all about the approach and the way in which you frame something. So for instance, if it's framed as an investment, it's looked upon differently as opposed to a tax or a fee. What did you find doing your research?
Absolutely. Most of those contributing to the projects were more likely to contribute because of the perception of some benefits. Okay, so depending on what they're benefiting from, which is most likely towards some improvements in their vicinity or local area. Now, I concentrated mostly on the donation-based aspect, or the donation type of crowdfunding on the website. For that reason only. There are other, I think there were other projects, quote unquote, that were carried on other websites or platforms that kind of were equity-based or investment-based crowdfunding, which I didn't really think was beneficial to my research at this time. But yeah, that was my thinking at the end during my research.
Good.
Hope I
Thank you.
answered your question. Yeah.
James, please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much for this panel. I learned a lot. I just have a quick question. When you look at equity, anything equity, whether budgeting or any other aspects, you realize that now it's like all over the place. People can make a case for different aspects of equity. So I'm just curious, what will be the path to sustainability? Will it be that we make a case for anything equity to be integrated into processes, be it a budget process or some other government process? That will be a better path to sustainability, so that it doesn't become this thing where a particular administration favors it, the other one doesn't. So what would be a path to sustainability? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take that initially, and then Arturo, I'm sure you have something to say on that. Yes, I think you put your finger on it, James. It really is about making it part of the institution of the processes. I mean, as the example I gave in my presentation, if it's in the budget call, right? So when the executive sends the call for budget proposals to the agencies, if in that it is embedded that, please identify your equity objectives, please talk about, please have specific initiatives relevant to these broad equity goals. I think if you do that, I mean, it's something as simple as putting it in the form. When you fill out the form, identify equity objectives, and then how the appropriations request is going to meet those goals. This is not glamorous work, but I think, to me, that's how you have to really embed it in the process of the organization to get it done. Arturo, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, could not agree with John more. It's really going to take that political will, but where does that political will come from? It comes from the people, and then I think it, like John has shared, like Richard and Jose have all shared. It's about leadership, but it's also about showing that data that, hey, this really benefits this community, and as a result, we should continue doing it, not just because somebody said so, because the data supports that. And as long as we have that data, I think that's important. John, you know this better than I, but a lot of times, maybe some of these agencies don't do such a good job of tracking the data and the benefits, and as a result, they don't have the numbers to show the people. And then so we get back into the political will piece, and the people, the local people that are really focusing in on advocating for this and saying, hey, we want this to be a part of our community. From my sense, in terms of working with communities, what's the old saying? A team is only as strong as its weakest link. So you can say that about a community, right? A city is only as good as its weakest city, weakest community or neighborhood. And so as a result, we should want to bring all of our communities and cities up to a certain level. But again, it's that political will, and it's about having data to prove that, hey, this actually works, because again, you're talking about public dollars that are going into that. And so I think leadership, I think showing the political will to do that and getting the people behind that is really essential for this to work and to continue to work.
Yeah, Richard.
So my question is to Jose. So quick question. I think you used some subjective measure of effectiveness, if I'm getting it right. Do you think there would have been a different outcomes with regards to self-reported effectiveness? Let's say an objective outcome with looking at let's say like budgets and outcome, like a financial outcome or revenue outcome. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think you said they answered some questions with regards to I am this, I am that, and so forth as your
Yes. Yeah, that's my biggest limitation of my study, that this is a self-reported data. So it's coming from city managers and assistant to city managers, chief of police, firefighters, and all the managers and the departments in cities here in Texas. Yeah, I would say that's my biggest limitation. That's why I'm trying to apply for a grant to kind of go deeper and to study more in a diet that's like with public management, but also with